everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host for today, Ben Thomas. Today's conversation centers around a vertical that we don't get to talk about a whole lot, and that's the judicial side of the AV industry. Whether that's broadcasting real-time court proceedings, or maybe that's using it for evidence. There's a lot of different ways that the AV community helps support the judicial world. And to talk about that a little bit more, I brought on my guest today, Damian Biltres from Wolfvision. Damian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, look, Damian, I am by no means an expert in judicial AV technology, but you know a lot more than I do. So if I don't know, there's probably a lot of people that have some questions, especially both on the manufacturer and on the IT integrator, installer, operator side. So wanted to get your perspective on really a high-level view of the judicial world, right? And we'll start here. What sorts of applications does AV, or what roles does AV play in these judicial applications?
Well, several. I mean, you have your traditional audio side, so you have to mic up the participants. You have evidence presentation, where really that's where Wolfvision comes in. That's our strong suit. Started off with document cameras and being able to present through our visualizers, which we did for many years. I mean, many courtrooms around the country still have some of our older visualizers today. But now, especially through the pandemic, it became a question of how do you capture all these formats? I mean, we went from everything is touch society to we don't want to touch anything, and wireless casting really became prevalent. So Miracast, AirPlay, Chromecast, all of a sudden there's a need for this. And that's really where we started. We started to come with the ability to provide a solution that you can cast wirelessly, then be able to annotate, because you have to annotate over evidence. So if you've ever find yourself on the witness stand, you may be asked by an attorney, can you please circle the corner of the street where you were standing when you saw the accident? So there's a method to that. There's also distribution. So now we got to distribute it in the courtroom, and we got to distribute it in a manner that allows you to abide by the process, because ultimately the process is very important. And then how do we capture that as part of the record? How do we bring in video conference? So in terms of AV is more prevalent than ever, but it still continues to be a very underserved market.
Well, I think one of the things too that is interesting about I guess we loop a lot of government and public sector conversations into this as well, but there are rights, especially here in the United States, there are rights and legalities that you have to go through, and whether it's having access to a broadcast stream or a recorded transcript or things like that, to, hey, we want to make it easy for somebody who might be disabled to testify in court, right? There's a lot of different applications. But I think a good place for us to start is to step back and say, look, a lot of these courtrooms were not literally built for a lot of this technology. They don't have the infrastructure. They may not have the cabling. They don't have the power. So how do you start there, right? Here in Dallas, we've got buildings that were built in the 1800s that we're using for courtrooms now.
Right.
What are some of the ways that you're seeing the architecture actually kind of inhibit some of that?
Well, because it is such an underserved market, a lot of times, even today, the architecture isn't built for that. So architects don't always think about evidence presentation. The fact that, hey, attorneys now have laptops, they need to be powered. So we still see that being missed in the plan. And with historical courtrooms, you're right, Texas has more than probably any other state I've ever seen, whether it's something important that happened or buildings just old, now we're deeming it historical. So adding technology to those rooms becomes a very large challenge, and that's where wireless casting comes in, because now we don't have to run conduit to those attorney tables. You can use applications such as AirPlay and Miracast to wirelessly present that evidence. With SignApp being the center of the room, we can bring that evidence in and then display it on a set of displays, even if those displays are on carts, for example. We have the ability to matrix that out on the cart, and you can have either multiple pieces of evidence, or you can have video conference plus content, which we see again today. And the process, as you mentioned, is very important. The legality of it. One of the things the pandemic showed was the law and the judicial system did not stop because we had a pandemic. A lot of the world shut down, but unfortunately crime didn't. And now you have to have a manner in which you can provide these people with their given rights, but also do it within the constraints of a pandemic and provide that public access. So what we had a lot of success with was the ability to not only cast wirelessly, but also to be able to bring in their favorite video conferencing solution. Because we're agnostic, our end users can bring Zoom, Teams, WebEx into the mix. They can stream out to public servers so that instead of having the public come into the courtroom, they can now view it on YouTube or Vimeo, or if the court wanted to host their own Wowza server, for example, they could.
You know what's interesting too, and I think that sometimes we give the end users a little bit more credit than we should with some of these. We make things actually unnecessarily difficult at times from an operation perspective. But I want to ask, I think most of us remember from the pandemic people hacking Zoom meetings and looking at planar displays on the Johnny Depp trial, or maybe I think the example we talked about earlier is the guy in Texas who was on a Zoom meeting and was a cat, right? It was
Right.
a filter that somebody had turned on. A lot of these systems need to be designed in a way to where they're foolproof, right? But who does that responsibility typically fall on? Is there normally an IT decision maker, operator in the courtroom, or what does that process typically look
So ultimately, the responsibility is on the end user. They should know their process better than anybody, but also the integrator that's working with them. A lot of questions sometimes get missed during the process of, such as what is, simple. What is your process? A lot of people do not know that you have to show evidence in a manner where it's previewed first by the judge, then the attorneys, then it's published to the rest of the courtroom, and then ultimately the rest of the world. Something that's simple to them, but to most integrators, it's something that they don't know, and it's lack of questions. By asking those questions, that's how you get the answers to foolproofing these. But we can help with that by providing within our solution a method and avenues to foolproof it. So we can preview, we can publish, we can provide protection so that if it's something like a domestic violence case or a juvenile case, that someone isn't out in the hallway, gets on the Wi-Fi, and now gets to view all that evidence that's protected. So it's a matter of just really asking the right questions and working with a solution like ours that's built for it, and it's not an afterthought of a manufacturer.
Well, let's stick on that for a second. You talked about someone jumping on the Wi-Fi and being able to see
Right.
whatever they want. There are obvious levels of privacy and security concerns that exist in the government and public sector that don't always exist in the private sector. What are some of those things that you typically see that might exist in that judicial world, especially from an IT management and cybersecurity perspective?
Well, number one, the fear of being hacked, period. I have a customer currently who for the last 6 weeks has been trying to recuperate their data because they didn't have the right cybersecurity policies and solutions in place. So someone got on their system, they got hacked, now they're being asked for Bitcoin, and of course, the rest of the story. So having that in place is incredibly important. What most don't do is budget for it. So I see this all the time at different government conferences, especially now with AI and how easy it is to hack things. I mean, I was at a conference last month where I found out that on the black market, there's apps that allow you to create a hacking solution. I mean, it's kind of like using back in the day when we were creating, pages on Dreamweaver.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What you see is what you get type of mentality. Now they're doing this with that kind of with hacks. So budgeting for this is incredible, and then the lack of budgets for the right solutions is huge. That's still a big deal, and that's where things have to get better.
Well, and I want to ask this too. I mean, especially we see this with a lot of different communities as AV continues to permeate different industries, whether it's the education side or places that were more prominent like hospitality. But the judicial world and the government world has a little bit of a different channel structure, right? Than
Right.
It might not always be manufacturer, dealer, distributor, integrator, end user, right? There are variances based on legalities, who's approved vendors, things like that. But if I'm an IT manager, decision maker at maybe it's a city or a courthouse, what are some of the things that I need to worry about from a channel perspective, even before I ever get to the hardware? What are some of the things from a channel perspective that I might need to know ahead of time?
Well, you should always obviously pick a reputable integrator. Go through the background checks, not just your local mom and pop that they swear they can install anything. That is the number one challenge. From there, make sure that the integrator that you're selecting has been trained on the solution that you're looking for. A lot of times what happens is, yes, they'll pick their favorite integrator and they'll have a great experience in the past. But if that integrator isn't set up to properly integrate that solution that they want, then that's where the wheels fall off the wagon. Because the integrator comes in, traditional AV is no longer traditional AV. A lot of times we're dealing in a full IT world. Our sign-up devices are IT appliances that provide AV solutions.
Right.
So it's not just plug and play with an HDMI cable and route it through your matrix switcher. There's a level of configuration that has to happen, and making sure that your partner is trained for that is key. Otherwise, the level of integration that you're going to get is just not going to be what you're expecting, what you're going to be happy with.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting perspective too, because I think you make a great point, right? The end user, manager, whatever, can't be an expert about every technology, right? And we're asking people who are already very stretched thin and worried every single day about hacks and, hey, is this usable? Can I, I'm worried about so-and-so lawyer coming in and not being able to show their evidence or their laptop dying, right? They're worried about a lot of other things, and it can't be, hey, is my system going to be up and running and functional today, or am I going to have to deal with a cyber attack or whatever? So very uniquely, it feels like in this case, we have to be extraordinarily proactive to maybe find some of those blind spots that they might not even know, right? It could be an IT manager who's been in the position for 3 months and their first role in a judicial role, right? There are things that the integrator has to take responsibility for.
Well, and you also have to think, this is best case scenario.
Right.
This is the large metro areas that are going to have the better IT teams. When you get out to middle America, to those rural areas, the IT guy may have been that bailiff that knew how to handle a computer.
Right.
And now they're putting it in that role because he's the only one that could get the printer to work. Versus a larger metro area that's going to have not just the circuit IT team, but the county IT team to back them up as well. So having a partner that is proactive for those folks, it's very important. Otherwise, you're not going to get the level of solution that will protect you against hacks, that will protect you, not even just sophisticated hacks, but just the guy who wants more information, the local newspaper guy, stopping information from flowing to the wrong hands or the inappropriate hands. That is just as important.
Well, and one question that I have too, and this is a little bit more on the manufacturer side, so more the traditional, I would say, AV community, is that as we continue as manufacturers or dealer distributors, whatever, as we continue to expand in different verticals, we find our way into places that are unfamiliar, right? And one of those places might be the public sector. We see this a lot in mission critical and access control, things like that. What responsibility does the manufacturer have in this whole process?
Well, the manufacturer's responsibility is to deliver a platform that's going to be reliable, it's going to be safe, and is going to be as foolproof as you can possibly get. Technology is technology. We want it to be 100% foolproof, but that doesn't always happen. From our perspective, I can tell you that our solutions run on our Linux code. It runs in an environment that's read-only. So now we're making it more difficult for just the everyday hacker to get in. We can segment and segregate our networks. We have multiple network interfaces so that the organizational network never touches the guest network. Things of that nature. So it is incredibly important for the manufacturer. I mean, that is line of defense number one. If you get a manufacturer who does not see security as important, then you're more likely to, suffer some sort of consequence.
Well, and last question here. I love kind of that context that you provided. And I think we'll see a lot more people maybe continue to find their way into the industry. But, if you had a crystal ball in front of you, right, maybe what do the next 5 to 10 years look like in this space, right? Because COVID, obviously, massive accelerant, reset a lot of buying cycles, things like that. What is the normal buying cycle in that world, and what do you see maybe the next 5 to 10 years bringing?
So normal buying cycle is, they operate on a October 1st to September 30th budget for the most part. Local governments sometimes tend to differ and they'll go calendar year. But usually right before the end of fiscal and right after the start of their fiscal, that is what I call our Christmas time. The next 5 years are still a lot of catch up because during the pandemic, yes, it was a huge paradigm shift. But during the pandemic, it was, hey, how do we just get working? How do we continue to work? How do we not just stop what we're doing because we have to move forward? So what you're seeing now is a lot of going back and saying, okay, we got to a point where we can continue to operate, but now we need to shore this up because those were Band-Aids. So the next several years is still going to be fortifying, what I call fortifying the castle. You're still building up that wall. You're still putting yourself in a position where we're going to move forward, and now we have a set standard for practicing just any evidence presentation. It's what's going to come after that, and that's what's scary because you got things like AI to consider. I mean, there was a case with an attorney in New York who had the case written by ChatGPT. So when they delivered their case, it was bringing up different cases in the past that never existed. So verifying that even the information that's being presented is correct, that's where the future is going to go. And that's probably going to be looked at with a fine-tooth comb because like we saw in that case in Wisconsin last year, I think it was the Kyle Rittenhouse, the video presented to one attorney was a complete different quality as the other. So one attorney had almost perfect 4K video, the other one had 540,
right,
or worse. And making sure that evidence is intact from one body to the next, that's really going to be the future. So how do we make sure that the evidence being distributed is the right evidence? That's you're going to have to look at IT for that. That's not going to be so much AV because that's going to look at things like maybe watermarking, putting markers in the digital file that can verify that evidence. And that's, I think, where AV is going to have to move, at least in the judicial and government space.
Well, look, I appreciate the insight, right? Like I said, it's not a space that I know super well, but that's why we have guests like you on the show because you tend to know a lot more than we do about this. But it was really informative, and I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us on Signal Flow. We appreciate you spending some time with us. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time.